Hello Hunters, Azortharion here, bringing you some exciting news from the WoW Within beta about Hunters, because we've gotten a huge rework, meaning a completely revised talent tree for both the class tree and every single spec tree. So in this video, I'll basically be going through every single class talent tree, and in 3 other videos, I'll be going over the specs. And as I go through each talent, I'm basically going to talk about my thoughts on it. The good, the bad, how it's going to change how you play, how it might not change how you play. And I'm also going to try and sort of, lob some feedback in Blizzard's direction. And my hope is that, you'll watch this video, you'll have your own thoughts, perhaps informed by my own, or you'll disagree with me in something. But the idea is, right now is the crucial feedback phase. So if we want to get some of these things changed, if we want Hunter to be the best it can be in the WoW Within, now is the time to provide feedback. So yeah, I appreciate you sticking around, and let's get straight into it, starting with the class tree for Hunters in the WoW Within. So right here at the top, we have Natural Mending, which we all know and love. So it's actually a little bit buffed. It used to be a 2-pointer, now it is a 1-pointer, and the 1-pointer that we get is stronger than the old 2-pointer, because the old 2-pointer used to be every 12 focus you spend reduces the remaining cooldown on acceleration by 1 second. Now it is 10 focus, which is actually basically a 20% buff to the talent, which is quite good. Post haste is also now a 1-pointer instead of a 2-pointer. Here it's not quite as rosy though, because we're basically getting the old 1-pointer for the cost of obviously 1 point, which means that our burst mobility has been reduced a bit. It used to be the case that we would have 50% movement speed for 4 seconds after disengaging, and now we are looking at 25%. Next up is Rejuvenating Wind. So this talent also used to be a 2-pointer, now a 1-pointer, and it gives the effect of the old 2-pointer, so 8% max health and 20% HP extra over 8 seconds when you press Exile. Hunter's Avoidance is the same, it's basically 6% avoidance, worded as damage taken from area of effect attacks reduced by 6%, so this is all good. Improved Kill Shot is also the same, at the 25% critical damage for Kill Shot. Wilderness Medicine has been turned from a 2-pointer into a 1-pointer, and I believe it is the same effect as the old 2-pointer. My memory kind of escapes me there, because I don't think anyone pretty much ever used this talent. Unless you're Durandil and you're doing soloing, then fair enough. Tower Trap is what we know. Tranquilizing Shot is also what we know. And Concussive Shot is also what we know. Next up is Survival of the Fittest, and if you're paying close attention, you'll notice 2 interesting things about this tooltip. So one part is wrong, which is that it says reduces all damage you and your pet take by 40%. It is actually 30% on the beta right now. But you'll notice that instead of being a 3-minute cooldown, it is a 2-minute recharge. And you'll see what that means in a moment. But yeah, so Survival of the Fittest goes from, like, one of our main sort of defensive wall abilities, goes from 3 minutes to 2 minutes. But it goes from 40% DR, which used to be a talent point called Nature's Endurance that kind of buffed it from 20 to 40%. That talent point is now gone, but the baseline is at 30%. Entrapment is the one we know and love, which is really good for like any mobs that charge towards you. If you can catch them with a tar trap with Entrapment, it'll basically stop them in their tracks. Counter Shot, just to interrupt, and of course Muscle for survival. And so here is the first new choice node that we get for Tranquilizing Shot. So we either get Kodo Tranquilizer, which removes up to one additional magic effect from its target. So that's pretty good. Means we can more quickly, burn through multiple buffs that some enemies have. Or Devil Saw Tranquilizer, which is if Tranquilizing Shot removes only an enrage effect, which it will most of the time on like raging weeks and stuff, its cooldown is reduced by 5 seconds. So we're just straight up like significantly stronger on raging weeks than we were before. Next up is Misdirection. No changes to Misdirection mechanically in terms of, for example, for BM, it's not gonna misdirect to your pet anymore. Or well, rather, it's not gonna misdirect pet damage threat to someone else. It is what it is. Next up is Scare Beast. That is also what we know. So this is useful for like incorporeal weeks. That's the main use of it. And then here's the sort of the connection to Survival of the Fittest. Padded Armor. Survival of the Fittest gains an additional charge. So not only did Survival of the Fittest go from 3-minute cooldown to 2-minute cooldown, it is now also, it now has 2 charges, which is insanely good for when you need to survive many one-shots or if you want to survive some heavy incoming rod damage while still leaving yourself able to survive the next one-shot mechanic coming up. So giving Survival of the Fittest the shorter cooldown and additional charge is a huge bonus to Hunter survivability and is very much appreciated. Next up is Lone Survivor. It just keeps getting better for Survival of the Fittest here. Reduce the cooldown of Survival of the Fittest by 30 seconds and increase its duration by 2 seconds. This used to be a choice node alongside Nature's Endurance, but with Nature's Endurance now gone, it's just kind of a standalone talent and it's really strong. In addition, it reduces the cooldown of Countershot Muzzle by 2 seconds. So range specs for Beast Mastery and Marksmanship, we go from a 24-second kick to a 22-second kick. And Survival goes from a 12-second kick to a 10-second kick, which is a pretty big difference, relatively speaking. So yeah, with this, we're looking at a 1 minute 30-second cooldown on Survival of the Fittest, and we'll see later that that gets even better. And its duration is also increased by 2 seconds, which makes it better for surviving like long bouts of rod damage. Like 6 seconds is quite short. It's good for one-shots. Extending that to 8 seconds makes it a little bit better for surviving rod damage. So like Survival of the Fittest is a much better defensive than it was before, and overall we're off to a really good start defensively for Hunters with this new class tree talents. Next up is Specialized Arsenal. Aim shot deals 10% increased damage, so this is because I'm looking at a marksmanship tree right now. For Beast Mastery, this is going to be Kill Command, and for Survival, it's going to be Wildfire Bomb. Next up is Disruptive Round. So this is a talent we kind of recognize. When Tranquilizing successfully dispels an effect, gain 10 focus. But the new part is that or Countershot interrupts a cast, gain 10 focus. So just like Demon Hunters have always had, we actually get a little bit of resource back when we do a kick, which is great. Next up is No Hard Feelings, which is when misdirection targets your pet, it reduces the damage they take by 50% for 5 seconds. So obviously this is really strong for any kind of soloing content or leveling, where you might do a really huge pull that would say like Barrage into misdirection on your pet, and your pet is just going to be way sturdier for surviving those big pulls. Then Scout's Instincts. This is a bit of an interesting one. You cannot be slowed below 80% of your normal movement speed while Aspect of the Cheetah is active. So even without this talent, given how much of a speed increase Aspect of the Cheetah is, it's pretty difficult to be slowed below 80% normally. So this talent seems like it would have kind of dubious usage, in my opinion. Yeah, it doesn't look that strong. Probably the most underwhelming new thing so far, I would say. Yeah, moving on. Intimidation. So Intimidation is the same as we know it, but there are other talents that we'll see in the next row that make it even more interesting. Then Explosive Shot. So with Explosive Shot's position here in the class tree talents, and another note that we can pretty much get every single DPS increase in class tree talent while having quite a few talent points left over to grab utility. With that in mind, it basically means that every Hunter spec will run Explosive Shot in pretty much all situations all the time. So yeah, I guess let me know in the comments what you think about that. I think, BM could use the extra button. Survival, it's kind of take it or leave it in my opinion. And for MM, I think it also works pretty well. Explosive Shot will benefit from Marksmanship's mastery, and it's generally a satisfying button to press when you're marksmanship. Next up is Binding Shot. So Binding Shot is what we recall of it, but we have some other talents that make it more interesting, else we'll see later. Next up is Scrappy. So casting Aim Shot for marksmanship, Kill Command for Beast Mastery, or Wildfire Bomb for survival reduces the cooldown of Intimidation and Binding Shot by half a second. So depending on how exactly we end up playing, which we won't know until later in the beta, how much haste we're gonna have, like from just inherently on our gear, from trinkets and so on, we could get quite a bit of CDR out of this. It's certainly better than nothing, but it's probably not gonna be a major thing. All right, here comes another really interesting talent. Territorial Instinct. Intimidation can now be cast without a pet and stuns 2 additional nearby enemies for 50% effectiveness. So Intimidation is 5 seconds stun normally. The 50% effectiveness means that 2 other targets will be stunned for 2.5 seconds. So the main thing here is, so there's one thing I should mention about the first part, can now be cast without a pet. So in the developers notes that landed, less than 24 hours ago as I made this video, by the time you watch this video, maybe they'll have clarified it. They allude to the idea that Intimidation is not supposed to be castable without a pet, but that it will automatically summon a pet when you use it. So obviously this is most relevant for marksmanship. I hope that it stays like this, where you can just straight up cast it without a pet, because I don't really see any reason to curb marksmanship's sort of utility any more than it needs to be. So yeah, that's what I hope. Then the second part is it stuns 2 additional nearby enemies for 50% effectiveness. So this seems like a half attempt, at giving hunters an AoE stun. But of course, and the power of an AoE stun is that you can assign it to when a bunch of mobs in a pack start casting all at once, and that you can reliably stop all of those casts at once. The problem with it being 2 additional nearby enemies, aside from it being just a low number in general, is that you can never rely on intimidation as an assigned AoE stun for any significant amount of targets. So if the intention here was by Blizzard to create an AoE stun opportunity for marksmanship, or like for hunters in general, they've just kind of, this doesn't do it. Because you might just press this and it's just gonna, let's say it's an 8 target pack, there's a very decent likelihood that you will simply stun the wrong enemies and get no value out of this outside of the main target stun, which is the only thing you can actually choose. So this is like just, I don't exactly know what the point of it is, because it's just so, like there's such a huge leap in usefulness from it being 2 random nearby enemies to all enemies that you could want. And it being 2 random nearby enemies makes it barely better than it just being a single target thing. Like that part is not really worth the talent point in many situations. So quite disappointed by this thing. I really hope that they'll change it to be a proper AoE stun on the 45 seconds to 1 minute cooldown. That would be a huge boon. And of course, I hope that they'll keep it so that you can actually cast Intimidation without a pet if you're marksmanship. Next up is a little DPS talent called Trigger Finger. You and your pet have 2.5% increased attack speed. And this is a 2-pointer, as you can see, so that goes up to 5% if you have 2 points, which you will. And this effect is increased by 100% if you do not have an active pet. So obviously this is for marksmanship. The long and short of it is that BM and survival hunters will get 5% increased attack speed from this, and marksmanship hunters will get 10% increased attack speed from this. Bit of a strange choice for a talent, given that attack speed is not normally something we care much about. We don't have a lot of things tied to our auto shot, with the exception of BM Wild Call. So interesting choice, but it's free damage, so we'll take it. I do think they could have done something more interesting here, though. Attack speed just seems like such an odd and random choice, arbitrary choice for hunters, but yeah. Alright, next up is a choice node of High Explosive Trap or Steel Trap. So High Explosive Trap is the same as we know it. However, Steel Trap is, mechanically it's the same as we know it, but it deals way less damage than normal. And the intention here is basically that Steel Trap will never be used for damage. It'll purely be used as a stronger freezing trap that also does a bit of damage. Given that it doesn't really do that much damage, I kind of feel like it's kind of a dead talent. So it's conceivable that some of the specs, in some situations with very low gear, they will need a filler that is not steady shot for their rotation. And Steel Trap might be the best way to do that. Although I guess you could High Explosive Trap actually does more damage, so I really hope that we don't end up in a situation where we're actually throwing these really weak traps for damage when they're clearly meant to be a kind of CC thing. But it's certainly possible. If you're going to do that, it should be High Explosive Trap rather than Steel Trap. And that leaves Steel Trap with very dubious actual use case, because practically speaking, it's really, it's just an additional freezing trap, I suppose. It doesn't replace freezing trap, so I guess that's the logic here. Moving on is Keen Eyesight. So this is just straight up a 2-pointer with 2% crit per point. Next up is Tar-Coated Bindings, which is just increasing binding shot stun duration by 1 second. So contrary to what some data mining indicated earlier in the beta, binding shot does seem to be staying a stun and is not becoming a root like it used to be. And so with this talent, for the investment of 2 talent points, you basically get a binding shot with a 4-second stun. It's better than 3, but it's still a lot worse than the root that it used to be. And I'll probably be disappointed right until the day they turn it back into a root, because when it was a root, it was very useful as a tank kiting sort of assistance thing. And, you know, for a class that doesn't have a lot of utility for the group in general, you know, that was quite welcome, but then they kind of destroyed that, and it sucks. Yeah, so I'm kind of just, please make it a root again so that there's a little bit more of a reason to bring Hunters to Mythic Plus. Next up is a choice node of Bursting Shot or Scatter Shot, so they work exactly the same as normal. Bursting Shot, the most disappointing thing is that it's still like a melee range thing, which means it's almost dead for Beast Mastery and Marksmanship, like especially Marksmanship, which is built around being a sniper that is really far from the group, or the mobs. Like, it's just completely impractical to use Bursting Shot, even though, like, conceivably it could be a decent AoE stop. But like forcing even the ranged Hunter specs to get a melee to use it is just like not fun. It's decent for survival though, and I think survival will make use of it as an AoE stun. But I mean, given that it's a shot, it just seemed like if you want it to be melee, it should be called Bursting Grenade or something, right? Given that it's a shot, I think it should be, you know, a completely normal ranged ability, so that, especially given that Intimidation is not really providing the AoE stun, AoE stoppage we had hoped for. Perhaps Bursting Shot could fill that role if it was extended. And I do think like the knockback, yeah, I mean, I would really love if they considered changing the knockback to a straight up AoE stun and just Bursting Shot becomes a proper AoE stun. And then I don't know what they'll do with the Intimidation in that case. And Scatter Shot remains the same as usual. It's a single target Azortharion. Can be used as an additional stop in a pinch. Okay, next up is Kindling Flare. So stealth enemies revealed by flare remain revealed for 3 seconds after exiting the flare. So this is kind of more of a world PvP thing than most PvE. It's kind of a little bit useful for dealing with pesky rogues, but yeah, that's about it. Nothing special here. Trailblazer is now a 1-pointer instead of a 2-pointer, and it gives the same effect as the old 2-pointer. So 30% movement when you have not attacked for 3 seconds. Great for navigating spaces in the game that don't allow you to mount quickly. Next up is Binding Shackles. This is exactly as we remember it. Targets rooted by Binding Shot, knocked back by Explosive Trap, or incapacitated by Scatter Shot, or stunned by Intimidation deal 10% less damage to you for 8 seconds after the effect ends. Usually more of a solo thing. It is quite niche. One like oversight here is that I think so it basically has all of our sort of hard CC inside of it. Or like sort of, I guess, not really hard CC, but like the short-term CCs in it, except for Bursting Shot. So I think Bursting Shot needs to be added to Binding Shackles, but that's about it. Next up is Camouflage. This is exactly as you remember, but there is a talent below it that we'll have a look at in a moment. That makes it a bit more interesting. Quick Load is from the old Marksmanship tree. When you fall below 40% health, Bursting Shot and Scatter Shot, so depending on what you chose in the one up above, they will have their cooldown immediately reset. This is more of a soloing thing. Like soloing mobs out in the world kind of thing, especially for Marksmanship. BM and Survival Hunters will generally not have that problem. Maybe Survival might. But yeah. Next up is Pathfinding. Once again, it's a 2-pointer turned into a 1-pointer talent. Used to be, 4% movement speed for 2 points. Now it only costs 1 point. Roar of Sacrifice is the same as always. Useless for PvE, but occasionally good for PvP. And here's a new DPS talent in Serrated Tips. So you gain 5% more critical strike from critical strike sources. So what does that mean exactly? Well, let's say it takes 500 crit to give you 1% crit. When you spec into this talent, it will only take you 475 crit, as in 5% less crit, to get 1%. That is basically a way of putting it. It's not like, it's a way of understanding it more than a way of how it actually works. It's more like, okay, if you getting 500 crit from a piece of gear, then you'll actually be getting 525. But in any case, it basically just means that, crit on like the stat weight or the value of crit per point will just be 5% higher than usual. Next up is Moment of Opportunity. When a trap triggers, you gain Aspect of the Cheetah for 3 seconds. Can only occur once every 1 minute. So this is more like flavor. It doesn't have a strong choice. I assume that the 3 seconds of Aspect of the Cheetah that you gain is the 90% movement speed, which means it's quite a sick burst of movement. But the fact that it can only occur 1 minute, and the fact that, many encounters, like most like raid bosses that are single target, we just don't have a way of triggering a trap all that reliably. I suppose a steel trap might do the trick, but as we've just talked about, like Steel Trap is not going to be used for damage. It's pretty much going to be used for CC. Next up is Born to be Wild. So remember when I said that it gets even better than Lone Survivor as far as Survival of the Fittest goes? Well, look at this. Born to be Wild reduces the cooldowns of Aspect of the Cheetah, Survival of the Fittest, and Aspect of the Turtle by 30 seconds. This used to be 20%, which was roughly the same, but now that it's a flat 30 seconds and it stacks with the Lone Survivor, so the end result is that we have a 30% DR defensive cooldown that lasts 8 seconds with a 1 minute cooldown and 2 charges. So, I mean, I've already spoken about how good Survival of the Fittest is going to be going into the War Within compared to now. This just makes it even better, and, you know, I don't dare say it's gonna fix Hunter's survivability issues, but it's gonna go a very long way, especially when paired with certain what's it called? Hero talents like a Smokescreen. Alright, next up is Ghillie Suit. So this is attached to Camouflage. You take 20% reduced damage while Camouflage is active, and this effect persists for 3 seconds after you leave Camouflage. So very, very niche and a little bit underwhelming in my opinion. So obviously you're really taking damage while in Camouflage. In fact, most damage will actually break you out of Camouflage. So for 3 seconds after you leave Camouflage, you take 20% less damage. So, but how often are you gonna take significant damage within a 3-second window after ending Camouflage? Maybe in PvP, but that's about it. Even if you start a PvE raid encounter or Mythic Plus encounter from Camouflage, you know, mobs don't tend to do a lot of their damage within the first 3 seconds unless you miss like a million kicks. So yeah, a little bit underwhelming here. Next up is Improved Traps, which is used to be a 2-pointer. Now it's a 1-pointer, and we get the same effect as the old 2-pointer. The cooldown of Tar Trap, Steel Trap, High Explosive Trap, and Freezing Trap is reduced by 5 seconds. So yeah, this is just good utility. No complaints there. Next up is our first capstone in the new class 3 talents for Hunter in the War Within, Emergency Salve. Feign Death and Aspect of the Turtle removes poison and disease effects from you. So obviously this is situationally extremely strong and situationally completely useless. It all depends on, you know, how many poison and disease effects there are, and it depends on how powerful they are, like if they hurt a lot. So, you know, having not extensively tested every dungeon and all the raid encounters yet, there's raid testing like tomorrow as of making this video. It's hard to know exactly how strong this is, but having the option is really cool. And you can imagine, like, if a dungeon would normally have you dwarf a poison or disease effect away, well, now you can just feign or even turtle those away, and then you can use your dwarf on something else. So yeah, pretty interesting here, but of course, highly like niche, but extremely powerful for that niche. And also kind of fitting for a hunter's themes, I would say. Next up is Death Chakram. Nothing has changed here. We're going to be using it all the time, so yeah. Whether that's a good or bad thing, well, let me know in the comments below, but it works the exact same, so no changes there. And that brings us to the conclusion of the Class 3 talents with Unnatural Causes. Your damage over time effects deal 10% increased damage. This effect is increased by 50% on targets below 20% health. So element 1 here is your dots deal 10% increased damage. For marksmanship, that could be like Master Marksman. For Beast Mastery, it could be Barb Shot. And for survival, it could be Wildfire Bomb. And, you know, Serpent Sting as well. Like, all 3 specs will likely have Serpent Sting involved to some degree or another. And this effect is increased by 50% on targets below 20% health. So, depending on exactly how much damage your dots are contributing, depending on the builds we end up running, and of course the Hunter spec you play, and this can be quite strong. But in any case, it does add a little bit of a execute bonus to all 3 specs. So, this is overall pretty good. So yeah, that's all the talents pretty much. Obviously, by far the most exciting thing is the defensive stuff. Like, they've really, between Survival of the Fittest and it gaining an additional charge from padded armor, its cooldown being reduced by 30 seconds from Lone Survivor, and then another 30 seconds from Born to be Wild, and Lone Survivor increasing its duration by 2 seconds, means we will not run out of defensives very easily in the War Within. And I think that we'll have an answer for almost all situations that call for it. Like 1 minute is really not a very long time at all. And 2 charges means that we're just so flexible. So I'm quite excited for this. You know, as with all like Mythic Plus balancing, like those high Mythic Plus players out there, as good as this is, we don't know how good other classes will be. And of course, there's tight competition for the few like specs or spots in Mythic Plus. Like this does not mean that Hunter is automatically meta, because for all you know, I mean, as exciting as a lot of these things are, damage wise, and as we'll get to in the other 3 videos, the spec talents, in Mythic Plus you need both to have excellent damage and you need to have good durability. Durability is a lot better than it was. That does not mean it's going to be the best in the game or anything crazy, but it is going to be a lot better. And as for like damage tuning and stuff, there's just no way of predicting that in the beta. So all I can tell you is that objectively speaking, a lot better defensively, and there's really no way to objectively evaluate how our damage will be relative to other classes, like come launch, and or even currently right now. But of course, that is also a topic for the upcoming spec videos. So yeah, I hope you found this useful. Please let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you agreed with anything I have to say, especially if you agree with it strongly, or if you don't agree at all, honestly, no matter what you think about anything I said here, it's really important that we provide as much feedback as humanly possible to Blizzard, much sooner rather than later. Because if we leave it late, well, then they can just say we didn't provide the feedback. If we shower them with feedback on the forums with the in-game feedback form, then, well, at least they can't say we didn't try to warn them about these things. So yeah, that's been Azortharion, and look forward to the upcoming videos about the spec trees, which are also very exciting. And yeah, until next time, I wish you all a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening. Bye-bye.